إذا أنا أسبقي ضب عروتك لو ضب عروتك صنو ايه تعال عنا طيب والله عليك الامان تعال والله عليك الامان تعال تعال عليك الامان والله تعال يا اخي تعال تعال عنا تعال عنا عليك طيب تعالوا لعنا
ليش وقف نصب الشهر؟ ليش وقف نصب الشهر السنة؟ هذول أهالينا والله وحياتي مصحف لعندنا. وهذا الدمار وهذا الدمار. لك بتعز علي الحجرة هاي بيتي. معلش وهذا الدمار وهذا السوار ودبابات الهاي. شاورك كده. هنا. يا محمد.
أنا كنت عسكري معكم وبعرف الظلم. وأنا كنت عسكري معكم وشفت الظلم وشفت شلون بنعامل المدنيين.
والله اقسم بالله بأول صف.
شو؟
تعالوا
قول عنده أخي. تعال تعال شرب مي تعال شرب مي تعال.
اكيد مش قوة بالنور مش هقطع على مين؟ شو قطعوا على مين شراب؟ بالنور قطعوا على مين؟
سليمان أنت وبالنور ليش رحتوا لهنيك؟ تعال لهون سليمان. تعالوا لهون يا أخي.
حط باروتو إجا حط باروتو إجا.
ضابط الاركان قيادة العام للجيش قوات مسلحة قيادة العميان قيادة العام للجيش قوات مسلحة قيادة العميان
بيجي ضابط كلب حشار بيجي وزير ابن حرام بيخرب علينا كلنا وهذا بكل ضيعة وبكل عيلة في واحد عاطل بكل عيلة في واحد عاطل بس مو كل العالم سوري أخي شو بدك أنا خلص أنا بقول من سوريا
هو سوري
أنا بقول من سوريا أنا بقول اتطوعت ودرست هندسي وكتر خير هالدولة كتر خيركم أنتم درستوني أنتم اللي علمتونا مال هالدولة ما في عسكري يعرفني وحياتك وحياة المصحف هلا بيتي أعطيه لواحد من القصير عم يجيب عيالك الله يسامحك ما بدي أجار
50 مرة و100 رجال أخذوهم عن حاجة يا أخي 150 مرة اسمعني شوي
150 هلا حينهم موجودين سيدي شو رايك نضرب هاي عمرو في يكون طلع على هالأساس في جهال
The top story this hour, Syrians hold a rally in support of the country's military in the city of Homs. The cheering crowd thanked the army for bringing back security to more areas in the region as well as other parts of the country. Among the ralliers was Homs Governor Talal Brazi. The Syrian military has recently made significant progress in the fight against foreign-backed militants on different fronts. The Flashpoint province of Homs has seen fierce fighting between the Syrian army and Takfiri insurgents since the militants launched a bloody war to overthrow the Syrian government.
There's a major exodus. Thousands of Kurds flee Syria and seek shelter from atrocities in Iraq. So, it says a stream of Syrian Kurds facing escalation violence in their war-torn homeland have fled to Iraq's northern Kurdish region despite unbearable heat and limited basic services. The refugees continue to seek safety. Around 30,000 Syrians, most of them believed to be Kurds. And why are they doing this? Well, they're probably getting ready to go to, to battle, another battlefront here, getting the people out of there. This comes on basically after this, from April 5th. Terrorists in Syria massacred 450 Kurds, including 120 children. So foreign-backed terrorists killed 450 Kurdish civilians. And that first video you saw was basically dialogue between the Syrian Arab Army and the Free Syrian Army. Iraq executes 17 people mostly over terrorism charges. They put 17 people to death, 16 of them on terrorism-related charges. They say it was the latest in a series of executions that have drawn international condemnation, but it says here also that they are the first executions announced by the ministry since the brazen July assaults on 2 major prisons that freed hundreds of prisoners, including some who have been sentenced to death, drawing criticism within Iraq that the executions were proceeding too slowly. Then you have this new CENTCOM underground war room for the United States intervention in Syria. This is from DEPCA files, so take it for what it's worth. But I think it's pretty obvious and well known that the United States has a pretty large presence basically in Jordan with the Syrian border, or on the Syrian border. This is the U.S. Air Force Command section is under direct communication with the U.S., Israeli, Jordanian, and Saudi Air Force headquarters, ready for an order by President Obama to impose a partial no-fly zone over Syrian airspace. So I can't really verify this or deny it, but it's coming from the BBC. So it's saying Aleppo, a city where snipers shoot children, and they go through the thing, and they basically say that, talking about Al-Qasir, where there's some pretty bad battles going on. Snipers are rife and the atmosphere tense, yet hundreds are forced to use it every day to get to work and study and buy food. But they keep talking about snipers, and when you go down here and they quote this doctor who's actually helping the terrorists and the Free Syrian Army, and he actually, I guess they said here that he's in exile and settled in Canada. And he doesn't really say whether it's the government or the rebels or the Free Syrian Army, but the BBC does a good job of basically pointing it towards a direction of the government, which we just saw a video of the Syrian Arab Army rescuing civilians that were happy to see them, including children. Remember that one video I showed? They're basically telling about the atrocities that were being committed against them, against their homes, against their people. So these areas were under siege by these rebels and these terrorists for a while. It was hard to get supplies in. The civilians were protesting occupation by the opposition. But we know what happens when the rebels and the opposition get desperate, which is they start taking it out on civilians, blowing them up and doing stuff like that. But they said they were basically targeting children, so targeting children and shooting them in the arms and that. Egypt says militants execute at least 25 policemen in northern Sinai Peninsula. So suspected militants attack police as officials announced former President Mubarack will be released. So this is pretty big news here. Israel just carried out drone strikes in the Sinai Peninsula just recently. The Egyptian government admits killing Islamists in custody. The Egyptian government acknowledged that its security forces have killed 36 Islamists in its custodies on Sunday, as the military leaders of the country's Islamists vowed to keep their fight over Egypt's future. And if I remember correctly from the article I saw, they suffocated them. Then I'm seeing this a lot in the news, alternative news and mainstream media. Agent provocateurs in Egypt that look at the shadowy elements in the pro-Muslim Brotherhood protests. So, it says here, a proud and patriotic Egyptian stands up to the Muslim Brotherhood gang. It's a known fact that agent provocateurs are used by all basically autocratic governments, especially military governments, to demonize protests and characterize protesters as hoodlums and terrorists. When there are popular anti-government protests in police states, state security forces dress in civilian clothing and do heinous things like cause destruction of private property in order to delegitimize the protests, so justify the full use of state violence. Really, the government's practice restraint. But it says, I would not be shocked if all the Egyptian security forces are engaged in this type of activity as they did it back in 2011. All governments that rule by terror and ideology rather than popular consent do it. And the Americans, the Brits, Israelis, Iranians, Russians, Chinese, during the 2009 anti-government protests in Iran, state security forces destroyed private property and blamed it on the protesters to discredit them. But with that said, the current situation in Egypt appears that the they appear to be foreign-based agent provocateurs like Mossad or CIA agents, and their al-Qaeda allies are the ones who are stirring up shit rather than Egyptian security forces. So the author says he doesn't believe the Egyptian security forces are involved in any agent provocateuring or false flags because they say they have nothing to gain by radicalizing the Muslim Brotherhood. He says a lot of these people are just kind of used, like all people, and by these political organizations, but at the top they're actually just as radical. But he says Israel and the U.S. have a lot to gain by stoking the fires, provoking hatred, and creating a civil war. It's the name of the game as far as divide and conquer. As far as basically Israel-U.S. pact is concerned, both the Muslim Brotherhood and the Egyptian military are enemies. They don't Morsi supporters jump off bridge to avoid being shot, so real or fake you decide, and there are ample reasons considered doctored imagery. For Reuters, it was definitive enough to go straight to the front page. So I watched this video. The way these guys repelled, it's like everybody was kind of like was walking. They didn't look like they was under any kind of direct duress or danger, and you know, they would like just random people. Just a couple would scale down here, and they looked like they were actually quite skilled at repelling, like they've done it before, i.e. some kind of security force, military. So something very fishy going on over there. Egypt's Hosni Mubarack cleared in one case as sources, so it's funny that this is all happening at this particular time. Been ordered conditional release in 2 of the 4 cases against him since April. This Egypt expert, the old guard, is back in power, so. And we even see this, as there's this kind of scampering in the news about, oh, well, Congress is debating whether they're going to cut off aid. I don't think they're going to cut off aid to Egypt, just as much as they're not going to cut off aid with millions and billions of dollars worth of aid to Israel. Like I mentioned before, the Egyptian government will basically get paid to not attack Israel. The death of the U.S.-Egypt alliance, we're hearing this now, you know. Say here that they carefully nurtured military and economic alliance between the U.S. and Egypt, which has served for decades to stabilize that vital part of the Middle East. Well, why is it vital? Mainly because the Suez and oil goes through there, but also because that's where Israel is. And stabilize is actually it's kind of misleading, because what they want is organized chaos. They want to kind of organize destabilization constantly. So then you have this, how America lost Egypt. Washington's support for Al-Qaeda was the straw that broke the camel's back. So it says here the events in Egypt must be put in a wider regional and historical context. Webster Sharpley says there was a coup and a counter-coup in Egypt. Morsi initiated events by breaking diplomatic relations with Syria and declaring war against Egypt's historical neighbor, which I've mentioned before too. The Egyptian people were mobilized by the millions, and Egypt's wise generals acted to preserve the Egyptian state against threats from the Muslim Brotherhood and their bloodthirsty allies in Washington. USA to Egypt is about keeping the Suez Canal open to warships. The canal is key to regional interventions, say analysts. So it says here they can also count on $1.5 billion in funding. I use the example of Bahrain, which is basically U.S. is willing to put up with anybody as long as they remain effectively for sale and create some kind of stabilization. At the root of Egyptian rage is deepening resource crisis. So here's some scare tactics or scare news. It says here Egypt is on the brink of a protracted state collapse process driven by intensifying resource scarcity. Let's not forget about the refugees, though. That's the main thing to be looking at as well. And also you have to look at the petrodollar. This is good for it, you know, because people can't say, well, I'm going to cut back on gas. People are still going to fuel up their 8-cylinder humongous trucks and SUVs and drive wherever they got to go, whether it's to work or what. You got this kind of in the backdrop. Arab world needs EU-style democratic union. It's funny, they actually started by saying the U.S. isn't responsible for the recent violent confrontations in Egypt, but it's clear that the Obama regime's approach to the uprisings is in shambles. They says they need to basically seize the opportunity in partnership with Egypt and other Arab states. They're talking about Gulf states and transition the architecture necessary to sustain democratic change. What that means, it's not real democracy, it's just westernization for financial purposes. See, EU relations with the Gulf Cooperation Council. It's an organization of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, set up in 81 to enhance coordination integration among its members, which just happen to be prominent members of OPEC. Saudi Arabia ready to replace Western aid to Egypt. So to those who have announced cutting their aid to Egypt, he says Arab and Muslim nations are rich and will not hesitate to help Israel to lobby U.S. and Europe to keep backing the Egyptian junta, so insists stability trumps human rights, so long as they keep the region, quote, stable. IDF deploys 6th Iron Dome battery, the newest missile defense cannon, first to be manned solely by reserve soldiers. 6 more Iron Domes are planned. And Israel uses talks with Palestinian Authority for expansionism. The U.S.-led talks were a political cover for expanding its illegal settlements. 80% of Israeli Jews say peace with Palestinians is impossible from August 16. To make you laugh, there's a report saying the UK government aid has been seized by Al-Shabaab. The Al-Qaeda-linked Somalian terrorist group took possession of enough aid to sustain it for a fairly long time. So some are asking the question, what is the U.S. and Russia's quarrel really about? And they say pipelines. for natural gas. Then we have the Kremlin warning Kiev over suicidal Ukraine-EU trade deal. It would trigger a permanent tightening of custom procedures for Ukrainian goods entering Russia. Another South Korea-US drill begins simulating invasion by North. North Korea is trying a new tactic with defectors, basically by being nice and offering cash rewards.